Tyrone, good afternoon, everyone. What I will do today is actually moderate a session that will allow you to hear what some of the key findings have been from the researchers that were awarded with our program for 2013. So over the last year, these researchers that I'll introduce to you one by one and the team that they've worked with have utilized grant funding from NASBA to develop some research. And the fortunate thing for us this year is that all of the recipients did work in areas that were related in some capacity to the CPA exam. And so I think you will enjoy the comments that we have. And we'll just go in order and spend a little time in dialogue with each one, and therefore give you guys an opportunity to learn about their work. And then from there, if we have time at the end of this session, we'll take some questions from the audience. However, if we don't, I think each of these gentlemen will be here for a while throughout the afternoon. I encourage you to speak with them if you don't get a chance to ask a question that you may have about their work while we're here up this afternoon. So the first gentleman that I'd like to introduce to you is Dr. Dennis Blind, and Dennis is from Bryant University over in Rhode Island. He and his team did work entitled, "Do Faculty Specialization and Testing Window Impact the CPA Exam?" And in terms of what they were trying to capture was they took an opportunity to look at over 700,000 first-time candidates sitting for the CPA exam and tried to make determinations in an effort to make determination on when a program has a relatively high percentage of passing rates, is there a correlation between an expertise from a professor in that particular area? So for example, if the professor teaching auditing has a specialty in that area, does that positively impact the exam success of candidates in the audit section of the exam? And then secondly, they also did some work on connecting or collecting and analyzing if a candidate's score is higher based on the particular testing window that they sat in particular the summer testing window. So first we'll address the specialization of the faculty person. And my question to you, Dr. Blind, initially is, what was the most significant finding that you had in your research? If you could give us an answer on that.
Well, the primary thing that we found is that there is a very significant relationship. The greater the level of specialization in an area, for example, on my faculty, we have 15 faculty and we have 4 tax people. So our students do quite well in the regulation section of the exam. And we think that goes to the fact that because we have more people who are in the area of tax, then we probably have more courses being offered, and so the students are getting more exposure to a wider breadth of tax material.
Absolutely. Did you, in terms of your findings, did you see that to go beyond just your university and into other universities and other areas of the examination as well?
Oh, absolutely. I just used it as a specific, that it was the case in all 4 areas that we found significant relationship. And we delved a bit further because the exam did go through the change in 2011 when we moved all the writing to BEC. And one of our thoughts was that accounting faculty in general are not trained to help students as much with their writing skills. So we found that when we looked at prior to 2011 and after the change in the exam, that the influence of the faculty on student performance or candidate performance in BEC was significantly less powerful. It was still a significant relationship, but it was less strong once we moved past that. So it does show that the expertise of the faculty has a distinct importance in students' performance.
Great, great. Could you share a little bit about the methodology that you used and the analysis process that you used to come up with your findings?
Sure. We got access to a great deal of data, say 700,000 test takers, and we built this in the form of a regression model. So for each of the sections of the exam, we were trying to predict the candidate's score, and we used a variety of variables such as the SAT scores of entry freshmen, the amount of curriculum they take in a variety of areas, whether the school is AACSB accredited or not. So with regression analysis, we were able to control for all these other confounding factors so we could isolate whether the teaching specialization area made a difference.
Excellent. What are your next steps in terms of your process, or have you completed it yet?
Well, that paper has come along pretty well. We're going to expand that, and we're going to now start looking at the curriculum. So we have gathered data from over 800 schools on how much of the curriculum is in accounting versus other business courses versus liberal arts courses, and we're going to start looking to see does the extent of accounting education have an impact on the student's performance.
Excellent. And then my final question for you, how do you think your work will impact the future of the accounting education in the United States?
Well, I think that we need to think very carefully about some of the things we heard about earlier about we need to think about how we do education. So if we're not doing as much as we can to help students in some of their critical thinking skills and their communication skills, I believe we can circle around and look at that as we make changes in the curriculum nationwide to see if we can have stronger impact in those areas.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you for sharing that with us. And then just so you would know in the audience, when Dr. Blind's work is finished here in just a couple of months, it will be available on our website at NASBA, and we'll do some publicity around it so you're aware of that. Next, I'd like to move to our second panelist, Dr. Fred Middlestat. Dr. Middlestat is the chair of the Department of Accounting at the University of Notre Dame, and his work and his team's work was a comparison of CPA exam performance by candidates at for-profit institutions versus not-for-profit institutions. And as you guys know, given the tremendous growth in the for-profit institutions, this is a very timely topic. And what Dr. Middlestat and his team did was they compared the performance of for-profit candidates against two control groups. One was a general control group of candidates from not-for-profit universities, and the other one was control group of candidates from not-for-profit universities that had similar demographics to the for-profit universities. So, Dr. Middlestat, I'd like to just ask you, what would you say is the most significant findings from your work thus far?
The most significant finding right now is when we control or compare the for-profit schools to the general sample of schools. The not-for-profit schools score 8 points higher on average than the for-profits do. And this jumps ahead a little bit, we want to analyze overall pass rates, and then not just for one part, but four part. But you can imagine that much of a difference in score is going to lead to a big difference in pass rate also.
So if you could share with us what your methodology in terms of the analysis was, and even how you collected the data that you used.
Again, we're using the large database that James Suh provided, and we've been looking at for the last few years. So this looks at exam takers from 2005 to 2014. We try to look at exams that were taking 2 years after graduation. So we threw out test takers that were beyond that period to try to link the performance back to the school. We try to control for gender, the exam section, age, the degree type, exam year, so those were dummy variables. And then we had a 1-0 variable for whether it was a for-profit or a not-for-profit school. And that is, you can identify that by looking in the database, and it goes back to their IRS status. We've done several analyses where the dependent variable, in one case, as I mentioned before, would be exam score, so 75, 80, so on. But then you could go pass, no pass, that could be another dependent variable. And then the final one would be pass all 4 parts, don't pass all 4 parts. And so we're just trying to again, break down how much is coming from the for-profit versus not-for-profit distinction versus these other control variables.
Are there any things that you found thus far that really were surprises to you, or anything you had not expected?
I think how poor the explanatory power is right now. I was talking to Dennis about this too, that R² is an indication of explanatory power, and ideally you'd like to have something like 60%, 70%. The explanatory power in these models are more like 4%. So there's just a lot of noise in this, and that's because we don't have enough information about the individual student, like GPA, SAT. Dennis has controlled for the SAT of the university, but you can't get at the individual test taker. You know, so I think that if we would have a suggestion, it would be in the database to collect more information at the individual level, then you could get more explanatory power and really separate what's coming from the individual versus from the school.
And so you'll know the information that he's referencing is what we collect from applicants or candidates in the application process as they are applying to take the exam. And some of that information would be a little more detail, would be more helpful to them in that. So thank you very much, Dr. Middlestat. I'll introduce our last panelist here, and this is Dr. Brad Trinkle from Mississippi State University. And he and his team worked on the influence of gender on the CPA exam pass rates. And their project examines the factors associated with gender that influence the CPA exam pass rates. And they believe that this study will provide a major step to understanding how to increase pass rates for women, as well as, in the long term, help to increase the number of women that seek passing the CPA examination as well as licensure. So, Dr. Trinkle, what would you say would be the most significant finding of your work thus far?
Thank you. Excuse me. In looking at gender, we also look at age at the same time, because most research says you have to look at both. And when we were looking at the individual sections, we found that male candidates were 11% more likely to pass an individual section and 7% more likely to pass the entire exam than females. And when we looked at age, now these were all looked at simultaneously, but when we looked at age, as the person increased 1 year in age, their probability of passing individual sections decreased by 1.4% and by 2.25% in passing the entire exam.
Excellent. What other variables did you find that maybe came into play with some of these pass rates that you found and some of the data that you saw?
We did include several more, including AACSB accreditation, which is very significant. Private colleges, so if someone attended a private college, they are more likely to pass. And two others that I thought were very interesting. One was that the more times you sit for a given section, the less likely you are to be able to pass that section. So if you pass it the first time, you're more likely to if you take it once, you're more likely to have passed it. And also, we found that the 150-hour requirement to sit for the exam was not significant in whether your likelihood to pass any individual section or the entire exam.
Okay. Would you share with us just a little more about your methodology that you used to come up with your findings thus far?
Yes, the methodology we chose to use was survival analysis, which is primarily used in the medical field and drug testing and drug rehabilitation, so that the longer you are in something, the probability of you surviving or getting treated or whatever changes over time. So we wanted to do that because you can take longer times between each section. You can take longer times as you continue to repeat sections. So we wanted to find a methodology that encompassed the changing of time. Any probability over that period of time was included in our model.
Great. If you had a suggestion to the regulatory bodies or even the developers of the examination based on anything that you found, what would that be?
Well, I think we need to take a closer look as educators and as test developers, regulators, to give a further study into what is making, is it the education, is it the exam itself, why is it that gender is making a difference? Why is it that males are more likely to pass the exam? Is it the exam itself? Is it the education? Or is it something that none of us here have in our models at all, as well as age or anything else?
Excellent, thank you. I'll ask one more question of the panelists, and I encourage you, if you have some questions that you'd like to ask, to please go to one of the microphones, and we'll do that as well from there. And this question is directed to you, Dr. Blind. You also looked at the testing windows and performance, in particular at the summer testing window. Would you speak to that some?
Well, turn it back on. We found that students performed the best in the summer window and the poorest in the first quarter window, which was not surprising to us about that with busy season if they're out working. But it made a lot of conceptual sense that when the students are just finishing their program in the spring, then they'll prep up and take a review course and take part of the exam then. And so basically the second quarter was the summer quarter was the best one, and then going into the third quarter, it was still fairly strong because it'll take them a couple of quarters to get through all four parts of it.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you very much. Any questions?
I think we have one over here.
To the microphone. Sorry. We want to make sure we get your audio on the recording.
Okay. All right, I have a question about when you said that if a person, and I think this goes to Dr. Trinko, when you spoke about that the more times you take.
The rest of her question was, the more time that you take the test, the less likely you are to pass. Does that get all of your question?
She got one behind.
She's got one behind you, right there.
One, two. Okay, so
Come on up here. Come on up here.
Okay, what I wondered is how fast that rate changed. Like when a person took it the second time, did they have more success than somebody who would have taken it 4 times?
No, every additional taking of one section, you were 66% less likely to pass for one more time.
Okay, so it was basically a constant rate.
It was deep. Well,
Okay,
it's
great.
not constant, but because it's a percentage of a percentage every time. It's a percentage of whatever probability is left. But every additional section cost you 66% probability of passing. Each sitting cost you 66%.
Okay, and then the gender, who did the gender study?
I did.
Okay, so the gender, was there a difference? I think you said that you had to look at gender and age together. Was there a difference if you looked at, was the difference in passing rates pretty much the same within each age group? Or can you speak to that?
I did not group age. I used age on a continuous variable, but The only time there was an interaction between age and gender was on BEC.
Okay,
And gender, on BEC, gender was not significant, but age was. And it was so, even though gender wasn't significant, because men were still, because of age together, were about 1% more likely to pass
thank
as
you.
they got older.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? Well, let me, on behalf of NASBA, no one else wants to come up here, right? I think you'll get many questions in the hallways afterwards, but on behalf of NASBA, let me thank you guys for coming and sharing, and thank you for your work, and we look forward to getting the final report so we can get those out and published. So thank you very much.